As with the video on animal rights, this is also a rather quick and perfunctory look at environmental ethics. It's not going to get very much in detail at all. Again, this is because we're nearing the end of the semester and I want you to be able to focus on your final project and on the final exam. So this little girl here, her name is Tippi Degre. She's pretty famous in France. She was born in and grew up in Namibia. That's a bushman. She's with one of the bushmen. And she's called the real-life Mowgli. She has spent her life as a young girl with all these wild animals, riding on the backs of elephants and laying between the front paws of lions and affectionately hugging some of the bigger cats, predatory animals. It's really interesting. And she claims to be able to communicate with the animals. It's hard to deny that she has some sort of a bond with them when you see the pictures of her life from when she's young. Anyway, the motif, as always, is that of archery, of aiming and shooting and trying to hit the mark, the bullseye of the right, the good, and the ought. So there's the idea of the target, that ethics is like this. It's like trying to hit the bullseye. All right, so environmental ethics, again, this is just kind of a quick and dirty look at the pertinent questions and issues in environmental ethics. Firstly, the question we'd ask is, what obligations do we human beings have to the natural world, if any? And you had the reading with Aldo Leopold, who was a writer from an earlier time, from the 1940s really, who wanted to establish the fact that we do owe something to the land, to the earth, and that we have ethical obligations, in his opinion back then, that we were ignoring to the earth. Are our interests more important than the needs of the natural world? So should we put ourselves over the natural world and allow the natural world to be denigrated and destroyed because human beings have certain needs? Or is there a way to balance them? Is the environment intrinsically valuable, meaning does it have inherent worth, or does it only have instrumental value as regards the needs of human beings? So does it have value quite apart from us as the ethical agents or the moral agents who are doing the valuing? If we say that it's intrinsically valuable, where are we going to ground that value? How do we give claims like that moral weightiness? This is a kind of well-known quote by Ambedkar, and he says, "History shows that where ethics and economics come in conflict, victory is always with economics," meaning if the choice is to take care of the world or to make money, then we're going to make money first. Vested interests have never been known to have willingly divested themselves unless there was sufficient force to compel them. So the powers that be that have the wealth are not going to give up their wealth just to take care of the planet, is the idea. We're going to have to force it. It's going to have to be something that they're made to do. So some background to this whole discussion. The environmental challenges, what are they? Well, dealing with the threat of endangered species, that many species have ceased to exist any longer, and that this has to do with the changes in the environment. Pollution, one of the most obvious. Wilderness preservation and how to go about it, and how to get more wilderness to be able to preserve and set aside. Treatment of animals, so our previous topic, that of animal rights, is implicated in this as well, especially treatment of animals as they're living in the wild. Then ecosystem protection, that we would not upset the balance of nature, but we would protect ecosystems, try to help them to maintain. The issue of climate change and what it's doing to all these different ecosystems all over the planet. Waste disposal, it's a huge, huge thing as far as human beings go. The waste that we produce, and where do we get rid of it, and how do we get rid of it in a way that it doesn't do damage to the planet overall, even to remote parts of the sea. There's Jacques Cousteau back in the 70s and 80s was talking about in the Sargasso Sea, which was one of the most pristine oceans on Earth, that there was all kinds of garbage that was found floating there. Waste disposal is a big issue. Global population, the human population is getting close now to 8 billion people on the planet. It's 7+ billion on the planet. And so the presence of human beings in greater numbers than they've ever been, it poses problems as far as the environment. Then resource allocation. And this is really a justice issue. Resource allocation, for instance, America consumes an incredible amount of the world's goods relative to the size of its population. how will we allocate resources in such a way so as to not have there be these great inequities and have it be that each country is sharing and carrying the burden of the environment and caring for the environment. Energy use. This brings in the whole issue of carbon and the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Economics has already been touched upon. Food production. How do we produce food for the huge numbers of human beings that there are on the planet? How do we do so in a eco-friendly manner? World hunger. This is an issue that it's a multifaceted issue. A lot of the hunger in the world has to do with particular economic practices in certain countries. But in other cases, there's drought and there's famine and those sorts of things. And so world hunger comes into play as we're talking about the environment and how to care for the environment. Social justice. So this brings in issues like, America has contributed an awful lot to the pollution of our planet and to the warming of the planet as far as the regular understanding of that issue. And ought America to pay proportionally to what she has contributed to the problem? Or ought all nations to kind of just start right now and address their sacrifice in order to help with the health of our planet from where we are at the present? Welfare of future generations. There's a brand of especially cleaning products and paper towels and toilet paper and those sorts of things called Seventh Generation. Seventh Generation products are Native American products that are being sold in our grocery stores and our department stores. And the idea, the title of the name of the brand comes from the Native American concept that they would care for the seventh generation out from themselves as far as the way they would treat the world around them. That's an idea that, of course, Europeans who came to this country, the largest number of people that came here were from Europe, did not have that idea and did not care for the planet that way. Our greatest causes for concern, this is just a series of pictures of things that you've seen a lot. So we're in Maine, and in Maine, if I go up by Rangeley or up on the Golden Road, certain parts of the state up into parts of Aroostook County, there's just been this incredible clear cutting. They've brought in feller bunchers and delimbers, and they've left messes behind like this. And if you look at something like this, if there's a moose or a deer trying to cross through this lot out in the wild, how is it that they don't break a leg or get injured in some fashion? And it takes a long, long time for that wood to decompose and for it to no longer be a problem. This is not a way to do timber harvesting. It just is wrong and leaves the land useless for anything else. And then strip mining. Strip mining is going on all over the planet. Strip mining is a big problem in New Guinea. And in New Guinea, sometimes they're dealing with pollution that's as much as 60 miles away from where they're doing the strip mining. Because what happens with strip mining is you get down so low underground that you're getting into the major underground water sources. And so the pollution, if there's pollution caused by it, can leach great distances far away. We have this kind of thing here in the United States, in states like West Virginia and Virginia, and other states as well. Those are two of the ones where it's the worst, especially West Virginia. And so it has a lot of downstream effects upon the ecosystems. Trawling nets, and sometimes these are very long, being dragged, dredging and down low by the bottom of the ocean. This is something with which most of you are familiar, the problems that it causes. And this is a scene that is repeated in different parts of the United States. Here, this is a scene that's again and again now being seen as the polar ice caps are melting and as we're losing the ice mass around the poles, especially the North Pole is the only place where we have polar bears. You're seeing more and more pictures like this because polar bear habitat is being affected. And then pollution, and pollution as far as air pollution. When I was a boy, I lived in New York, and we would go over to New Jersey, and we had to pass through Elizabeth City. And there were people who lived nearby to smokestacks like this, and in the car with the windows rolled up, the tears would be rolling down our eyes. And you look out the window and see children playing outside by this incredible pollution that was there. and also clothes hanging out on the line for them to dry. I can't imagine what it was like. And this kind of a scene is less and less seen in the United States, but now other nations, as they start to develop wealth and want to have what America has, most notably India and China, have scenes like this as well. And Japan has had its fair share of problems with air pollution too. This is a scene that you've seen again and again and again, and it's in many different parts of the world. These mountains of garbage. On the end of Long Island, New York, there's a giant dump that they call Mount Trashmore. And even here in the Bangor area, we've got a mountain, a small mountain, or a very large hill that's made out of garbage. And then with radioactive waste, what do we do with it? Where can we put it where it's not going to ultimately leach out of the barrels that we have in it and get into our water sources? Is a big question. We really don't know what to do with it. And then we have these nations that continue to harvest the depleted and waning supply of whales in the world. Most whale species are endangered, and yet they still go after them. And so we have organizations like Greenpeace that try to interrupt it or to come against it and to call attention internationally to these practices. So these are all too familiar pictures and scenarios for your generation. You've seen them so much that perhaps you've gotten used to them and they just don't move you anymore. I want to ask, what does seeing them produce in you? Do they still disturb and unnerve you, or have you become hardened against them so that they can't bother you anymore? Where do you fall on the scale of between anger and apathy? Does this still cause your blood to boil, to get you upset to see the things that are being done to the planet, or are you apathetic? And by overexposure to some of these things, we can become apathetic because we figure that's the only way I can handle this without having this throw me into great upset whenever I encounter it. So ecotage has been this slow process of going from organizations like Greenpeace, which are law-abiding and try to abide by international law, to Earth First, which was eco-warriors and eco-terrorism when it came along. And they were well known for spiking trees and doing other sorts of destructive practices to construction equipment and to the harvesting of wood. And then the Earth Liberation Front, which is a full-on domestic terrorist organization. Ecotage has moved towards radical environmentalism. The feeling is that they have to do something extreme in order to make a difference. And along with this comes the voluntary human extinction movement that has two mottos. One of them being, may we live long and die out, and also phasing out the human race by voluntarily ceasing to breed will allow Earth's biosphere to return to good health. It's a bid to have human beings become extinct, in other words. This is a statement made all the way back in the late 90s, that's a long time ago, by National Park Service biologist David Graeber in Los Angeles. And it's really been that we only have more of this kind of thinking going on these days. I spoke with an author who had some popular books down in the Brunswick, Maine area, who really thought that basically it'd be a good thing for the planet if all of we human beings were to die off. So David Graeber says something similar here. He says human happiness and certainly human fecundity, our richness and our fertility, our ability to produce, are not as important as a wild and healthy planet. The ecosystem has intrinsic value. More value to me, says Graeber, than another human body or a billion of them. So he'd be willing to see a billion less people on the planet. That means they have to die, right? In order to have the ecosystem be in a better condition. Until such time as Homo sapiens should decide to rejoin nature, says Graeber, some of us can only hope for the right virus to come along. And probably COVID-19 is not the right virus he was thinking of, because it's not doing away with millions of human beings. It's not having the impact on global health that it was thought it would. But some pandemics would have that kind of potential. They would have the ability to cause there to be a large-scale loss of human life. So that kind of thought, like Graeber expresses, and like that author down in Brunswick that I mentioned to you expressed, is, I think, wrapped up or is communicated well by Agent Smith in the movie The Matrix. This is Agent Smith with Morpheus. Morpheus is the leader of the opposition to the computer world that they now live in, or computer-generated world that they live in, called the Matrix. And here's him having a discussion with him. He says, "I'd like to share a revelation that I've had during my time here. It came to me when I tried to classify your species, and I realized that you're not actually mammals. Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops an equilibrium with the surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to an area and you multiply and multiply until every natural resource is consumed. The only way you can survive is to spread to another area. There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague, and we are the cure." And the we is the agents of the Matrix. So it's kind of this kind of an idea being put forward. The thing that's making the planet sick is human beings, is the idea. So here's some background issues when we're discussing this whole area of study. Different terminology applies to different philosophies. Anthropocentrism, by its etymology, means human being centered. This is the notion that only humans have moral status. And then zoocentrism is the notion that both humans and non-human animals have moral status. Biocentrism, which is a view I hope you won't embrace, and I'll show you a reason why soon in a slide that shows why I say I don't think it's a great idea, is the view that all living entities have moral status, whether sentient or not. You'll see what I mean soon. Species egalitarian is one who believes that all living things have equal moral status. So you saw that Peter Singer in your reading, he's a species egalitarian. A species non-egalitarian is one who believes that some living things have greater moral status than other living things. So then there's these two terms. Ecological individualist is one who believes that the fundamental unit of moral consideration in environmental ethics is the individual. But an ecological holist is one who believes that the fundamental unit of moral consideration in environmental ethics is the biosphere and its ecosystems. There's somewhere in between those two would be the person who thinks that human beings are important and should be considered in the whole picture of the biosphere, but not just one human being we're not talking about. All right, so when we talk about something having instrumental or extrinsic value, we mean that it's valuable as a means to something else. For many people, nature possesses only instrumental value, just that and no other kind. Something that has intrinsic value or is valuable in itself for its own sake is the view that others hold. Many others, in fact, believe that nature has intrinsic value. It is valuable in and of itself, regardless of its usefulness to us. So a central question here when we approach this, when I said I think that one of these views is kind of a skewed view, what entities have moral status and to what degree do they have it? Intrinsic value has traditionally been thought to lie at the heart of ethics. Philosophers use a number of terms to refer to such value. The intrinsic value of something is said to be the value that that thing has in itself or for its own sake or as such or in its own right. Extrinsic value is value that is not intrinsic. In other words, we assign that value, but it doesn't have any built-in value of its own. So here's my argument against species egalitarianism and against biocentrism, made simple. You may find this simplistic, but I think it works. Does the species Pan troglodytes, chimpanzees, have the right to exist? Chimpanzees and pygmy bonobos are the species that are genetically the closest to us as human beings, and they're very highly intelligent creatures. Do they have the right to exist? I think most human beings would say absolutely. Does the species Ascaris, which is roundworms and hookworms, have the right to exist in the same sense that we would say that pygmy bonobos and chimpanzees do? So these are roundworms and hookworms. Do we think that they have a right to exist just because they exist? So I think most of us would say no, right? We see that those things don't have the kind of value that we would assign to a chimpanzee. What entities have moral status and to what degree do they have it? So there's numerous theories floating around out there regarding how to ground the moral worth of human beings. And that alone in a secular setting is pretty hard to assign. Pretty famous philosopher Raimund Goethe says that it's just a matter of whistling in the dark to talk about human beings as ends in themselves or having intrinsic value. He thinks there's no way to do that in a secular fashion. And he's saying that as an atheist. So what of other living things? Do some have greater value than others? Is a domestic turkey that's been bred and raised to be eaten by humans and is not a very intelligent creature, not like a wild turkey, is this of comparable worth and value to a dolphin or to a pygmy bonobo? If we say yes, then where do we draw the line? Are single-celled organisms intrinsically valuable? What about plants and trees? And so this is a very difficult place to do anything other than to be arbitrary when we try to make distinctions between these things. Must a living thing be an animal, or is the fact that it's living sufficient to confer moral worth upon it? And then what about things that are non-living but are part of the beautiful ecosystem that we have, like lakes and rivers and streams and oceans? How about mountains and deserts and canyons and grasslands? Do they have moral worth? If we claim that they do, then how do we underwrite that value? Where does it live? Where does it reside? Can we conceive of a way of investing these things with value which has some sort of objectivity to it? I don't know of any. As a philosopher and as an ethicist, I don't know of any. Are there standards which are not humanly defined by which we could say that one of these entities has moral worth? I just want to say that I believe that it does, but I can't prove that it does. I don't have some way of proving that philosophically. If so, how would we as humans be able to recognize and respond to such standards? And really it has to be as we try to work together as the nations of the world, that we try to find a place of agreement where others share our view as far as the value of our planet overall. The nature crunch is not something in the distant future, right? Melting ice caps and climate chaos are already with us. We are overfishing our oceans. We are clear-cutting the forests. We are poisoning the land with chemical fertilizers. We're putting animals in factory farms. We're manipulating seeds with genetic engineering. That would be a fun topic to talk about just by itself. And the list keeps on going. So why are we doing all of these things? And that question, it's a lot of it is economically driven. And then this is more practical. Do you know what things around you are called? The names of trees and birds and clouds, and does it matter? Do you recognize cumulonimbus clouds or cirrus clouds when you see them? Do you know the different kinds of conifers and deciduous trees that are out there when you see them? Are you aware of the different species of birds around you? And does it matter? It seems like it does matter. You have to know what something is to care about it, not just take it for granted as that's the natural world out there. So here's some causes for hope that I would give you. Awareness and concern has certainly been aroused in the last 2 decades, especially with the younger generations. There's a lot of hope there as far as the younger generation being concerned to try to do things that would be healthy for the planet. This is a book I own. This is the release of the book. They announced when it was released, December 5th, 2002, Washington, D.C., Science News. Global analysis finds nearly half the Earth is still wilderness. So I own this book, and you're going to see some maps that come from it. So according to the most comprehensive global analysis ever conducted, wilderness areas still cover close to half the Earth's land, but contain only a tiny percentage of the world's population. So more than 200 international scientists contribute to the analysis, which was published in this book, and this is where these maps come from. You can see South America. See the green? That's unfragmented forest, and that's the majority of what you can see there in South America. So you can see that there are these other places, but it's really hopeful as far as how much unfragmented forest there is. Europe is not quite the same. Europe is highly fragmented by human land uses, but there's a significant bit of unfragmented forest. You can see especially up when we get in the neighborhood of Scandinavia and Finland and nations up there. Then Asia and Northwest Pacific. You can see here that there's a lot there, quite a good bit. And we move to North America. Again, an awful lot of unfragmented forests. And then forest that's highly fragmented by human land uses is far less than we might guess that it is. And that's an encouragement. So cultivated systems, areas in which at least 30% of the landscape is cultivated, are indicated by this brownish goldish color here on the map. And you can see there's a lot of places that are not cultivated, not significantly cultivated, and that's hopeful. What are the implications of these facts? Well, the implications of these facts are that we have this picture of human beings being on every square inch of the whole world, but it's not quite that. And we've seen people in places where land is limited, like the usage of terraced gardening in China, or the way that the huge population of a place like Hong Kong all live together and do so well. So there's certain practices that we can employ that make it such that the level of population that we have still could have a lesser impact on our world. I think one of the most practical things we can do as far as at our own life level is to try to reacquaint people with nature. I go out, we have 13 grandchildren, and I go out in nature with them, and I make sure they know what everything is, and we talk about it. And we pick up, if there's trash that we find out on a hike, we go on some pretty long hikes, we take that trash out of there. So reacquainting people with nature is an important strategy here. I have introduced you to this little girl. She's now a mom, and in her, I think she's 30 years old now, living down in the Worcester area. And this is Sylvia. You can see their name really is Dang on this National Honor Society certificate. And she was our host daughter and considers herself to be our Vietnamese daughter, and us are her American parents. Sylvia used to come with us down to Jonesport, Maine, which is in Washington County, which is a very wild place, and we would be by the ocean. And we were in this setting. So this was right outside of our house, and it was rocks, as you can see, an ocean. There's Great Wass Island that has a nature conservancy that we could hike on. And she used to complain because there was no internet down there. And she'd say, all there is here is rocks and water. I hate this place. She couldn't say I hate this place when she first came here. She'd always say, I hate this place. Nowadays, whenever Sylvia sees any pictures of that area, she says, that is my favorite place on earth, because she got exposed to it enough. She got out in nature enough that she then began to appreciate it. And when we get people away from all the technology and we get them in nature and give them the chance to enjoy nature, that I think will cause them to have a vested interest in taking care of it and wanting it to be there for their children. This is a place that we can see. I had to go across to this in a boat, but it's called Mistake Island Mistake Island, and it has Moose Peak Lighthouse on it, just off of Jonesport. And Sylvia could see over to here from when we would hike out to the coast. And for her, she fell in love with this place. And that's what we've sought to do with grandchildren as well. I think if we try to get children out in nature, there's a lot of interesting books that talk about this. Bernd Heinrich is an author who's a main author who writes about trying to get people in the woods. There's a wonderful book called Last Child in the Woods. There's a number of authors who are writing about trying to get children out in nature and appreciating nature. I think that's our best hope for being able to have there be those who in the generations to come would work to try to bring health in overall as far as the environment of our planet. We'll end there.